Welcome to the 5th episode in the 2nd season of Justice Center Weekly, a podcast from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I'm your host, Kevin Steele, and with us today is John Carpay, the president and founder of the center. John is here today to give us his thoughts in reaction to the just announced Online Harms Act, Bill C-63, out of the federal government in Ottawa. Everybody, from civil liberty organizations to ordinary citizens, have been poring over the actual text of the act in the last couple of days and finding in it much they don't like. So, John, let's get down to it. What do you think? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? I'm guessing down.
This is the worst assault on freedom of expression ever in Canadian history. It is got a camouflage of good intentions by talking about, good things that we can all agree with, like we should ban revenge porn, and we should protect children from bullying, and we should protect children from sexual exploitation, all of which are already prohibited by the Criminal Code of Canada. So this is not some new form of government action as the government is making it out to be. There's certainly some good intentions there, but it's just there is so much wrong with this bill. We're just going to touch the surface in some of what we talk about in the videocast today.
Okay, well, you're giving it thumbs up for a few good things, but you've often said, the government never takes away freedoms without offering you some kind of, safety or good intentions. So I guess that's a given. Maybe start from the top. What do you see as some of the worst things about it?
Well, you've got this unnecessary duplication of criminal code provisions. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to read some, so I won't be looking into the camera. But in terms of the harms that this Online Harms Act, which harms freedom of expression, should be called the Online Harming Freedom of Expression Act. But for some of the things that are supposedly good about the bill, we've got Section 162.1 of Canada's Criminal Code already prohibits online and offline publication of an intimate image without consent. Section 163 of the Criminal Code already prohibits publication of obscene materials and child pornography. Section 264 sub 1 of the Criminal Code prohibits criminal harassment, so it's already illegal to bully a child. Section 319 prohibits the public incitement of hatred towards a group identified by race, ethnicity, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. Vaccination status is not on the list, in case anybody was wondering. So hate speech is already criminalized. We don't need new laws against that. Section 59 of the Criminal Code prohibits sedition, which is the advocacy of the use of force to achieve governmental change within Canada. So that's already illegal. Sections 83.21 and 83.2022 criminalize instructions to carry out terrorist activity. So the online content that incites terrorism or extremist violence is already illegal. Last but not least, Section 22 of the Criminal Code prohibits counseling a criminal offense. So it is already, whether we're talking shoplifting or murder, it is already a crime in Canada to counsel somebody else to commit a criminal offense of any kind. So really, there's nothing in the Online Harms Act that I have found that actually targets something that is not already a criminal code offense. But what this does is it empowers a huge new layer of federal bureaucrats who can go after social media services, and it's up to the federal cabinet to further clarify what that means. So there's unnecessary duplication, which is a problem in and of itself. If there's a problem with law enforcement, that these crimes, if the police do not have adequate resources to enforce existing laws, then we need to talk about potentially providing police with more resources. But you don't fix the problem of poor enforcement, if that is the case. You don't fix that problem by passing new laws that are additional laws that duplicate existing laws.
Well, it's almost like these new laws or duplications are kind of window dressing to some of the other stuff that I've heard, at least online in the various discussions, that are hiding other things. And one of the things that I've heard discussed is this idea of preemptive punishment for crimes not yet committed. Do you see that in there?
Yeah, the Online Harms Act will make it possible that if somebody fears that somebody else might commit a criminal code offense, in particular the advocacy of genocide, which is prohibited by the criminal code. If somebody, let's take an abstract name, let's say Mark Smith, my apology to any Mark Smiths out there, but if somebody fears that Mark Smith might advocate for genocide, that person can lay an information before a provincial court judge, and the provincial court judge can issue an order that Mark Smith is to wear an ankle bracelet and is to abstain from alcohol and drugs and is to provide bodily fluids, urine or blood to confirm that he's not taking alcohol and drugs, place him under a curfew where he has to be at home most of the time, take away legally acquired, legally owned firearms, etc. And a court can impose these draconian restrictions on personal liberty on Mark Smith, who has not committed any crime, who might not commit any crime, simply because somebody in Canada fears that he might commit a crime and can then go to court and get this court order. This is absolutely outrageous that you can go to court and get this kind of a court order simply because you fear that somebody else is going to advocate for genocide, when, again, that's already a criminal code offense that is punishable by up to 5 years of imprisonment, which, by the way, the Online Harms proposes raising the maximum penalty to life imprisonment, not for anything you've done, just for something that you've said. Life imprisonment, the harshest criminal sanction in Canadian law.
Yeah, I saw that. A lot of people were focusing in on that life imprisonment, and they can invoke the sentence for things you haven't even done. In other words, they're sort of overturning the centuries of jurisprudence where you have to have a trial and you're presumed innocent and all that stuff. Is that what they're saying now in this act?
Well, two separate things. One section of this act will increase the maximum penalty for advocating for genocide from the current 5 years imprisonment is the maximum penalty. That can go up to life imprisonment for advocating for genocide. Now, you've probably heard this slogan, especially since October of 2023, when Hamas massacred over 1,000 Israeli civilians, and then after that, Israel attacking Hamas in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. There's a popular political slogan that says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Estonia and the Czech Republic and Germany have declared that this political slogan is a criminal speech, and you can be criminally charged for saying that in those three countries. Here in Calgary, a man was charged for chanting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, some people say that slogan is advocacy for genocide, that what it boils down to calling for the killing of all the Jews in what is now Israel. And other people will say, no, it's not advocacy for genocide. It's a pro-Palestinian political slogan. My question is, do we really want the government to have that power to declare or to determine that political slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that is criminal hate speech and that it is advocacy for genocide, and that you could face up to a lifetime in prison for chanting that slogan? That's what it boils down to. Okay,
and I guess working with that is this idea that it's creating, I think somebody had said that it's creating more government bureaucracy in order to make these adjudications. It's not necessarily courts that are going to be making this call. And so I guess who's going to be making the determination on, say, that slogan? You said it's already, been adjudicated in courts, but now who are they suggesting should be making these calls?
Well, it's not been adjudicated in Canadian courts, right? So that again, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. To my knowledge, there's no Canadian court ruling on that. But I put it forward as an example. When you look at advocating for genocide on paper, it seems pretty straightforward, but it isn't, because you've got things that people will say that one person would say, yeah, you're advocating for genocide, and somebody else would say, no, it's not advocacy for genocide. And we're going to have a new army of bureaucrats that will be empowered to monitor the social media services and it's up to the federal cabinet. This is another very scary thing about the online harms bill. It is the federal cabinet has the power to make all kinds of regulations that are going to require social media services to do certain things or prohibit them from doing certain things. And the federal cabinet can also decide on what kind of penalties are going to be in place for noncompliance. And they can do all of this without going to Parliament. Parliament passes, the Liberals and the NDP have a majority, and I have the impression they're both in favor of this bill. Certainly the Liberals are. I would anticipate the NDP joining in to vote in favor of this legislation. So you have the Online Harms Act that is passed by Parliament. There will be debate. There's a first reading, second reading, third reading. It'll go to committee. There might be opportunities for public participation if the committee has hearings, et cetera, et cetera. However, the act then empowers the federal cabinet to make all kinds of other regulations which have the force of law. And so the federal cabinet can further define what is harmful content, what does that mean specifically, what is a social media service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What must they be required to do? What can they not do? What are the penalties, et cetera? So that's arguably the worst aspect of the bill is it gives, and the federal cabinet meets in secret. There's no real-time accountability. I mean, ultimately, there's accountability by way of an election that's typically held once every 4 years, but otherwise, there's no public input, there's no public scrutiny. The cabinet meets in secret and then issues these regulations which come into force, and they are binding on everybody with the force of law. So that's arguably the worst aspect of the Online Harm Act is how it empowers the federal cabinet to make all sorts of regulations that govern social media services and the people that provide them.
Right. So this amounts to a giant power grab is what you're saying. This is the scariest part because it is a power grab by the cabinet opposed to, our representative democracy, I guess. That's ultimately what you're saying then?
There is, yes, absolutely. When you empower the federal cabinet with being able to determine fines and penalties for compliance or non-compliance with whatever requirements it's going to impose on social media services, that is frightening. It is a huge power grab, absolutely.
Okay, and I understand there's been something of a power grab being handed back to the Canadian Human Rights Commission as well. This is something that a lot of people had focused in on. Some were saying, it's the return of Section 13. I think that Marty Moore, in an interview with Ezra Levant, actually made reference to that. The return of Section 13. Do you see this?
The Justice Centre was one of the organizations in Canada that fought to get Section 13 removed. Section 13 enables, and again, it duplicates, it does and it does not duplicate. I'll explain in a minute. We've got Criminal Code Section 319 that criminalizes hate speech. So the willful promotion of hatred against an identifiable group, a group that is identifiable on the basis of their race, ethnicity, skin color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, willful promotion of hatred against an identifiable group is already a criminal code offense. However, if you are charged with this offense, and it happens rarely that anybody is charged with this, but if you are charged, you have the Crown has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you intended to promote hatred and that you did promote hatred, and there are defenses available to the accused person, like the defense of truth. Conversely, with the Canadian Human Rights Commission, they're only looking to prove their case on a balance of probabilities, and you don't have the procedural protections available. And the penalties there, if you utter speech that the Human Rights Tribunal deems to be hateful, you could be ordered to pay up to $50,000 to the federal government, and in addition to that, ordered to pay up to $20,000 to somebody that the tribunal deems to be a victim of your hateful speech. So up to $70,000 out of pocket. And worse yet, complaints can be filed anonymously. So an atheist in Vancouver can file a human rights complaint against a Christian lady in Halifax because she made some derogatory comments about a mosque in Toronto, even if the members of that mosque in Toronto are not offended by the comment. But the atheist in Vancouver can complain against somebody who said something in Halifax about something going on in Toronto, and the Canadian Human Rights Commission can prosecute that lady in Halifax, and she could end up on the hook for paying $70,000, even without having what is historically in our system the legal right to face your accuser and to question your accuser. That is out the window with the Online Harms Act.
Well, I do recall this being a problem with the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and that is the idea that the process is the punishment, and it costs you just to appear, whereas the costs of the accuser are all absorbed by the commission. And so we're bringing this back, and it always was viewed by opponents as a way to just sort of bleed your political opponents dry, to wring them out. And beyond that, of course, there was the chill in speech that it brought, because it was so easy to bring a complaint that, people would be just restraining themselves from, using their free expression in order to make their political arguments.
Yeah, the Online Harms Act is going to empower an army of deeply offended busybodies to file thousands of human rights complaints anytime they disagree with a statement. Now, the Human Rights Commission, might choose to immediately dismiss and not take seriously 90% of those thousands of complaints. But the other 10% is going to include a lot of speech that is currently not caught, that you would never be prosecuted for under the criminal code, right? So you've got the criminal code prohibition on hate speech. It does have some chilling effect on free expression in Canada, but in the big picture, it's fairly minimal. The Online Harms Act is going to empower the Canadian Human Rights Commission. That blanket of illegal speech is going to grow from a pretty narrow bit of speech that is prohibited by the criminal code. It's going to be a much broader bandwidth of speech that could run afoul of the Canadian Human Rights Commission with its new powers to prosecute, a non-criminal prosecution, but it's a prosecution by the state against the individual. The chilling effect is going to be enormous, and we're going to see all kinds of anonymous complaints that are filed. And as you mentioned, an example, people against their political opponent, they don't like something that somebody said. Well, file a human rights complaint. You can do it anonymously.
Right, lawfare to drain them dry. I guess, when you talk about the Human Rights Commission, and I suppose these regulations as well, it comes down to who gets to define hate. And this is something that I think we've discussed in the past. I think you've talked about how difficult it is to define hate.
It's so difficult. The Supreme Court of Canada in 2013 issued a ruling in a case known as the Saskatchewan Human Rights Tribunal versus Whatcott. And the court had this muddled, meandering decision and devoted over 4,000 words. I counted. I went to the Canley website and cut out the section of the lengthy court ruling. Supreme Court struggling in vain to try to define what hatred is, and put that in a Word document, did a word count, and it was over 4,000 words that the Supreme Court devoted to trying to come up with a coherent definition of hatred. And they failed. And they failed for the simple reason that hatred is an emotion. And it is something that's felt by people. You don't know if another person is feeling hate or not in what they're saying. Only the person themselves might know. So it's a subjective emotion, and hate, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. You and I could watch the same YouTube video or read the same tweet, and you could say that it was hateful, and I'd look at it and go, no way, that's just somebody expressing their opinion. Or I could look at that same tweet and say, that is hate speech, and you could look at it and say, no, it's pretty pointed, vociferous, aggressive political commentary, but it's not hate speech. So it's completely subjective, and that's the problem with it. And the Supreme Court proves the point by feeling the need to devote over 4,000 words to trying to define it, and they still have a pretty muddled, pretty unclear definition. A just law is a law that is clear. All citizens should be able to know. You've got a criminal code section prohibiting murder, and it spells out there in one or two sentences what murder is. Shoplifting, assault, all of these things, they're concise and they're straightforward, because every citizen has a right to know whether or not you're running afoul of the law. But now we've got the Human Rights Commission can have the final say on what constitutes hate speech, and they're not bound by the criminal code definition. And the Supreme Court of Canada ruling in Whatcott doesn't provide any clear guidance. If you need to read 4,000 words of a Supreme Court decision to try to know what hatred is, you know that there's not a clear definition that you could possibly arrive at.
Okay. Yeah, well, we have it in the criminal code, so they obviously did try to, define it. When there's reasonable and there are good reasons. The Supreme Court was split very narrowly. It had a narrow majority of the Supreme Court upheld the criminal code restrictions on hate speech as constitutional. Close to half of the court, given the chance, would have struck it down. So the court narrowly upheld it as a legitimate restriction on free expression. But it's it's not 4,000 words. You could read it in a minute if you go online and if you Google Section 319 Criminal Code of Canada, it'll pop up right there. You can read it in a minute. It's fairly straightforward. Again, there are good arguments for repealing it, but at least in its support, you could say that it's reasonably straightforward, not the human rights approach to hatred. Again, Supreme Court used up over 4,000 words to take a stab at it, and they failed. Okay, well, what about this idea of the idea of making fears illegal? This is something that I think I had seen somewhere that people had argued that combating things like Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, these kind of things. Well, I guess they sound good on paper, but in practicality, in the real world, how does that work? Does it leave too much power in the hands of bureaucrats to, using these vague terms like this?
Yeah, well, absolutely. The federal government, part of the pretext for taking away our free expression is that we need to combat anti-Semitism, we need to combat homophobia, transphobia, we need to combat hatred. Well, sounds good on paper, but what if somebody launches into a tirade against Islam and denounces it as a primitive medieval cult and criticizes sections of the Quran. Is that Islamophobia? People will argue that both ways, yes and no. What if people object to encouraging kids to go onto puberty blockers and take opposite sex hormones? What if somebody says to a child, look, it's just impossible to transition to the opposite sex. You can't do it. No matter how many drugs you take, no matter how much you might mutilate your body or, have new parts put on, you cannot become the opposite sex. Okay, if somebody makes comments like that, is that transphobia? If somebody says from the river to the sea, is that anti-Semitic? For each of these questions I'm asking, you'll find people will say, yes, that is transphobic or anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, or no, it's not. It's so subjective. And so if this bill passes, we're going to have a new army of bureaucrats working for the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And you're going to see a massive chilling effect on free speech in Canada.
Okay. Before I ask you what you're going to do about this, I just want to clarify one thing, because a lot of people are saying, well, this is much less extreme than the Online Streaming Act that everybody was complaining about a little while back. I just want to clarify. You're saying this is actually worse than that?
This is a full-on frontal assault on free expression, the worst in Canadian history. Full stop.
Okay, so it is worse than the Online Streaming Act. Okay, well that
my
goes
view.
Against
my view.
Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, you're also the head of the Justice Centre. What do you think you're going to be doing about this as an organization?
We're going to be launching a petition. We're going to prepare a brief that will be sent to every member of Parliament, setting out why this is terrible legislation. We will be encouraging people to contact their member of Parliament, urge their MP to vote against this bill. We are planning to create an educational brochure that we will make available in hard copies as well in due course, but initially it might be just online. We're going to be encouraging people to spread the word, and we're going to provide them with the background information about this bill, what's in it, why it's bad, so that people can educate their friends and neighbors and colleagues and so on. And so we're going to spearhead opposition to this bill and do what we can to see that either it doesn't pass at all, or that significant amendments are made to make it less bad.
Well, yeah, I know the government wants you to talk about the good stuff, which appears to be all duplication of stuff that already exists. So I guess some education on what the bad stuff is worthwhile. Good. Well, I'm glad you got a start on it anyway, and I know we're going to be talking about this again real soon as you spend more time looking at the act and picking it apart. Thanks so much, John, for coming on to this episode of Justice Centre Weekly, and I know we're going to talk again real soon.
Thank you, Kevin.